What is up, art family? This is Taylor Payton of thebeginnerdrawingcourse.com, and today I'm going to tell you how you can sketch better now. So in this video, you're just going to see me using a time-lapse clip of some of my sketching today. And I'm going to be talking to you about some of the things that I'm doing and how you can replicate these things in your own sketching endeavors in order not only to create better sketches, but to advance your skills quicker. So some of the things that I really enjoy doing and have learned to harness over the years are to sketch lightly at first and then to weight my lines and add emphasis on them thereafter. This basically means going in with a really sort of loose sketch. And after I find my rhythm, my tempo, I'm liking the shapes that I've laid down, then I will go in and begin to add little occlusions here and there, such as the corners of the mouth or adding some extra eyeliner, just areas that I know are going to need emphasis. Emphasis is created when we spend a lot of time in one area and start to add more contrast. Now, contrast is one of the most important elements in art and one of the most important elements in general. If you can, for a second, humor me and imagine that there were no contrast among humans, we wouldn't be able to tell anybody apart. Likewise, we need the principle of contrast in order to make things seem distinct and to give off a sense of difference. So in this case, I used the contrasting forms of her eyeshadow as well as darkening her eyebrows, adding some occlusions to the corner of the mouth, and lastly, just sort of adding more line weight around her hair and around her jaw area for the quick sort of bust portrait there. Next, I'm also going to be talking about sketching on the edge of your comfort zone. So typically, if we're not being conscientious, and it happens to all of us in various aspects of our lives, whether we are not being conscientious of the food we're putting in our bodies, how long we're sitting, how we haven't talked to a family member or friend in a while. If you're not placing the spotlight of your attention on something, it's going to fall to the wayside. And so if you're not being conscientious of your own abilities and what you're comfortable with versus what you're uncomfortable with, you're going to find that you'll end up in a limbo of sorts. Now, this limbo doesn't last forever, but it can last years if left unchecked. It's the limbo of staying in your comfort zone. Your comfort zone is where you feel pretty confident. You feel pretty good, and you feel like you're able to pretty much accomplish whatever you set out to draw in this particular zone. This applies more to intermediate artists typically, but even beginner artists are masters at finding their own comfort zone. Now, when you're sketching, it's the perfect time to experiment. Not only because you don't have any real stake in it, it's not going to be a 100-hour piece. You're simply here to explore and to play around and to increase your abilities. So in order to do that, one of the best things you can possibly do is to figure out where you're at in terms of your figures, in terms of your environments, in terms of whatever subject matter that you happen to be drawing. You can warm up a little first in your comfort zone, like doing a portrait if that's your thing. I've drawn a lot of character portraits, so they feel like they come out pretty easy for me, especially at certain angles. And I don't have to think a lot. I just sort of let it happen, if that makes sense. Anyhow, what I end up doing after finding where my comfort zone is, just sort of testing it, reminding myself what those waters feel like, I'll then dive a little deeper. In this case, just working from imagination and configuring a pose that I've pretty much never done. I like to use similar foreshortening angles like the ones you see on the legs, but I'm just kind of figuring out how I would make it at least somewhat convincing for her to be riding a sword. Now you might ask yourself, why did you sketch your character riding a sword? To which I would answer, I don't know. In all sincerity, I'm working from imagination, and it's just my opinion. But if you are working from imagination, you might as well use a little imagination. We've all seen characters standing around, and that can be sort of boring after a while. So in this case, I'm stretching my abilities with a dynamic pose and throwing a sword underneath her feet just because I can. It's definitely not a comfortable thing to do, and therefore reinforces the point. This next sketch is a pose that I've, of course, never really done before. I do modified versions of seated poses a lot, and if you've taken my character drawing course, you see me run through a few of them. Basically, what I'm doing here is I was thinking of sort of a cannonball kind of bikini shot thing, and I wanted to get a little bit of motion and action, but I had just done an action shot, and without drawing the water and the context and whatnot, I just wasn't really feeling it. And so instead, I'm just going in and figuring out how I would like to reposition certain parts of the sketch so that it's not that same kind of cannonball feeling, but rather has a different sort of just seated, interesting pose. The third tip that I would like to share in terms of sketching better now is to use contour lines. I use contour lines a lot in order to contour the forms, especially when I'm working very line heavy. I talk a lot about line in the beginner drawing course, which is available at, of course, thebeginnerdrawingcourse.com. And what I really have come to find is that I will get a lot more form and dimension if I'm able to just draw across those contours, whether it is with an outfit or a piece of attire, or if I just do it for the sake of it being a sketch that I want to understand the volumes and the forms of the anatomy better. This way, I have a clear way to communicate not only to myself, but to my viewer, what the dimensionality of the forms happens to be. It helps me get a lot more volume in the cylindrical aspects of the limbs, or in the cylindrical aspects of the neck, or maybe the spherical aspect of the head. Oftentimes you'll have to learn to place facial features, in order to actually get a reasonable looking head. But I'll just move on to the next tip now as I'm moving on to the next sketch, and it seems like a good time to talk about it. Another thing I'll do to challenge myself and move outside of my comfort zone is to try different angles. Now, I haven't drawn the same angle once of this character since I've started drawing her, and by the way, no, she doesn't have a name. I just drew a random kind of punk girl with some piercings, and I figured she would be my quote-unquote model for this sketch page. So what I like to do often if I'm practicing characters is I will go ahead and draw a portrait of a character, whether it is a pre-existing character that I'm doing fan art of, or it's a character that I just kind of make up on the spot to flex a little character design muscle, or it's simply a character that I came up with, an original character that I want to explore different facets of. After I do that, I usually stick with that character and work on my character consistency. So character consistency is important, especially if you're planning on doing any sort of sequential art, comics, or animation. If you're able to get at least a vague notion of character continuity and consistency, you're really able to get a semblance of what the character's shapes are and how they translate in different angles. One thing I was also practicing while I was working on the sketchbook page, was my female anatomy. So the female anatomy is obviously one that is rather difficult to capture, and I have spent years, and I mean years, honing my female anatomy. I remember in college, I set off on a journey to draw 100 girls because I was just really dissatisfied with the way that they were looking in my sketchbook and in my assignments. So I set aside some time every single day because I was an art student. I always had a sketchbook with me, and I would find reference, or I would work from a drawing book that had better drawings of girls than I could do in it. And that focus really paid off for me. I'm now able to sketch females from imagination really comfortably. And it's really something that I'm grateful for. I'm grateful that I did. And I continue to this day to hone and refine my ability to draw the female figure as well as the male figure, and just kind of anatomy in general. There are so many facets to art, and that's why sketching is absolutely integral to explore them. Because again, it's very quick. It allows you to work on the edge of your comfort zone and to contour forms so that you can begin to really understand what you know versus what you're kind of struggling with or what you do not know. So working with one character can be really useful in this regard, because you're working on your character consistency and you're able to get across the same message every time and understand how to translate those characters' shapes in various poses and formats. So this is the last drawing on this page and the last drawing of this video. It's another laying down pose. Again, all of these are from memory. I did not use any reference. And the purpose of this is to test where I'm at in terms of not only this character, but my female anatomy, my figure art in general. And contouring really obsessively helps me learn where I'm not understanding the forms, where I'm not getting things to feel believable, even in a semi-realistic sense, because that's typically how I like to work, is more or less semi-realistic with a little bit of anime, Western influence. So when I'm working on any of my sketchbook pages, I often find that I'll have to get a good workflow going, a good flow in terms of how I'm going to lay things out, how I'm going to practice and study, and how I'm going to walk away from that sketchbook page and from that sketching session feeling satisfied with the work that I've done. And if I've worked on the edge of my comfort zone, if I've contoured some forms and made them look dimensional and understood them better, if I've tried some new poses, if I've, kind of developed a character throughout the drawing that I've sat down to do, all of these things I find are how I start to measure success in my sketchbooks. Because as I'm exploring and as I'm trying new things, I still want there to be some consistency and some theme that I can follow and wrap my head around, so that I'm not just drawing everything and trying to do everything all at once. There is a specific idea on each page. Not to say that you can't go crazy on certain pages and just really have at it. Maybe it's very cathartic for you, because it definitely can be. However, this video is about being able to sketch better now. So I guarantee you that if you follow these tips, if you're willing to configure your forms using some contouring, if you're willing to try some new poses and test the edge of your abilities, if you want to warm up before you really get started on the stuff that you are trying to learn or tackle or kind of evaluate as part of your sketch session, then I think that you'll be in really good shape moving forward. One last thing I will say is, when you're done, don't just put it down and not look at it for a while. Evaluate at the end of every sketching session. Figure out what you really struggled with, where your marks just didn't line up, what you had to erase a bunch, and how can you avoid that in the future? How can you solve that problem so that it is not a recurring problem? Oftentimes, since we lack conscientiousness in certain regards and we fall into certain habits, we will allow artistic imbalances to rest within our skill set for days, weeks, months, even years. So make sure that you're rooting out that sort of paradigm that will pop up from time to time in your work, and you'll be just much, much better for it, simply because you won't be making the same mistakes over and over, which of course is one of the absolute worst ways to progress. So, seeing as how the video is coming to a close, I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this simple video talking about some basic practices to help you sketch better now. If you want more guided lessons and more artistic principles and fundamentals to help you ascend artistically, I highly recommend you check out thebeginnerdrawingcourse.com, where I have the beginner drawing course, the character drawing course, a simple anatomy course, or a massive bundle with all of my tutorials, and that includes digital painting tutorials that I've made over the years. I want to thank you for your support. Feel free to give the video a like. If you haven't already subscribed, then I would also appreciate that too. Be sure to click the notification bell so that you get notified when I upload new videos. And that's it for now. Take care and happy drawing.